It's time to hit the reset button on Brady Cook. Plus, the biggest potential issue facing all of college sports, really not getting enough talk right now. So let's talk about that and everything else I'm looking for in week one right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail, you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And by golly, it's Monday here on Locked On Mizzou. And does that not make it feel like it truly is game week? It definitely does for me, but unfortunately, there is some bad news here since the last time we spoke. I did tease that we were going to discuss Chad Bailey. Well, some news dropped since then, according to Eli Drinkwitz. Chad Bailey, the Missouri linebacker, had a procedure of some sort done on his body. I know I'm being very vague here because, frankly, Drinkwitz was being very vague, just being called a procedure. And while Chad is certainly a very good player, you might remember when I said, who are the most irreplaceable guys on this Missouri roster? Well, Chad wasn't among them simply because of the position of middle linebacker, number one. Well, certainly you've got Tyron Hopper there. I'm just for all intents and purposes, I'm just considering them both Mike linebackers, middle linebackers. Let's just say off-ball linebackers to be a little bit more proper in my language there. But I just don't think that position in particular is all that important, number one. And secondly, Damian Wilson actually filled in for Chad last season against the Georgia Bulldogs and was mostly a pretty good to my eyes in that particular ball game. So unfortunately, Bailey looking like he'll be out for about 3 weeks. So that puts him right on the cusp of being available for Kansas State in week 3. So obviously not particularly great timing there for the Tigers or Chad himself. But the good news is, other than Bailey, it doesn't really seem like the Tigers have many injury concerns at the moment. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed there. And this past Saturday, by the way, on my agenda, I had my fantasy football draft. Of course, met up with a bunch of people at Southside Pizza. Later, a little post game at the Deuce Pub and Pit as well. Good time was had by all. But of course, when you get a bunch of guys together doing fantasy drafts, well, we're obviously going to talk Missouri football as well. And I was really struck by just how many divergent opinions there are out there about Brady Cook. And most of the guys I was talking to, well, they were pretty positive about Cook and feeling optimistic about the young man coming into this season. But of course, I've been to family reunions too, where I've had people tell me that literally say that Brady Cook is terrible and he's the worst thing that's ever happened to football. Okay, that last one might have been a bit of an exaggeration, but that's kind of the message that is being put out there by some people, certainly my YouTube commenters. Some of them just have no faith in Cook whatsoever, and they think, well, it's obvious that Horn needs to start. And frankly, after last season, whether you believe that how much excuse he deserves for an injured shoulder last season, a labrum injury, I'm frankly done with it. It's game week. It's week 1 of 2023. It's time to hit the reset button with Brady Cook. Whatever he did last season, whatever he did from the bowl game from 2021, none of that matters anymore. It really doesn't, especially in terms of my evaluation. I'm just hitting the reset button. Whatever we see in week 1 and week 2, that's what I'm going to go with. Now, obviously, Eli Drinkwitz is going to see a lot more than that. He's been seeing practice. He's been seeing all off season. He's got a better handle on this. He's certainly got more information than we do. Now, what he does with that information in terms of making the correct decision, That's arguable, I suppose. But at the very least, we all have to remind ourselves that, yes, Drinkwitz and his staff have way, way more information about this situation than we do at the moment. Now, I have to say, I was kind of astonished this morning when I read one prominent, well, why am I even saying one prominent Missouri beat writer? I guess Gabe DeArmond's about it at this point now with Dave Matter on the sidelines for the moment. But Gabe was saying that, well, he thinks there's a non-zero chance anyway that Missouri loses this ball game to South Dakota. Obviously not a prediction by Gabe or anything. I'm sure he's saying 99% of the time Missouri wins this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it's 99.999999. I mean, there's no chance Missouri is losing this ball game. Maybe if they played South Dakota State, who is number one in the FCS preseason coaches poll, sure, I could see that. Heck, maybe even there's a non-zero chance that Southeast Missouri could give K-State a little bit of trouble in week one. But South Dakota, no, that ain't happening. And let me tell you why. Again, just a simple glance at this poll. These teams, South Dakota, I should say, that team didn't even receive votes in the top 25 poll. From my experience, if you're in the not even receiving votes portion of FCS, yeah, a big old time blowout is coming your way. I'm talking 50 plus points. Anything less than that would frankly be a little bit disconcerting. Missouri's defense should utterly and completely dominate this game. And really, so that tells you, well, what are you looking for? Obviously, you want to see the quarterbacks look good. You're going to evaluate Brady Cook and Sam Horn and Garcia, whoever gets on the field. But beyond that, I'm kind of most interested offensively to see the tight end usage. I really am. Obviously, Jordan Harris, Brett Norfleet, couple of freshmen I've been talking about in the preseason here. Everybody on the Mizzou beat's been talking about them. I want to see if Missouri actually uses them in the passing game. What type of routes are they running? Or are they just glorified sixth offensive linemen like they've been for the last couple years here at Missouri? You know what? I'm also going to be interested in looking for a gambling edge of some sort here too, because last year, Missouri's defense was obviously wildly improved. And so much so that the market couldn't really catch up to it. The advanced statistics and projections, it took weeks for the broader market to actually catch up with the fact that Missouri went from having one of the worst defenses in FCS football, certainly for the first half of 2021, to having one of the best defenses in 2022. So right now, I think actually the edge is a little bit simpler. It's not really about the offense or the defense. Right now, I just don't think the broader market likes Missouri as much as I do. For example, over at FanDuel Sportsbook, Tigers were sitting at 6.5 at the over-under for that whole time. I don't believe that bet is up anymore. But again, I'm sticking with 8-4 for the Tigers. That was my prediction about a month ago at the end of July, and I just haven't seen any reason to come off that yet. Certainly Chad Bailey being out for 3 weeks is not enough to change any type of prediction there. So 8-4, while maybe not as optimistic as the wildest eyed Missouri fans out there, and I hope you guys are right, by the way, but over 1.5 over the market is not insignificant at all. So I think Missouri is better than people expect, and well, maybe we can capitalize that week 3 with a bet against K-State. Stay tuned. And of course, while I'm as happy as anybody that week 1 of college football is finally here, I have to admit that week 0, as it's often called, well, it kind of sucks. And actually, it makes week 1 weaker as well. So I want to talk about all that and, well, what to look for in the rest of college football in week 1. But first, I want to tell you that now is time for your game changer of the week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. And much like Kirby Moore, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. And with over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, Goldens, sours, and more, they're constantly releasing limited edition experimental styles to add to your variety. The beauty of this product is they're fit for all times. You can drink them anytime, anywhere to make every activity even more enjoyable. And you can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code Locked On to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day and every dayers. Tomorrow on the show, guess what? We're going to talk about more football, and I absolutely cannot wait for it. But one thing I could have waited for, I could have waited for college football this past weekend. Week 0, as it's often called on the internets. Wasn't a whole lot of fun, was it? That Notre Dame Navy game from Dublin, the 42-3, I believe, final, that drubbing in Dublin there, not quite doing it for me. Not exactly getting my, I don't know, what am I trying to say? Not exactly satisfying my taste for college football there. But, and frankly, the way week 1 is done these days as well, with games spread apart across 5 days, I don't really love that either. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not as bad as Major League Baseball, which to me, the fact that MLB doesn't have every team on one opening day anymore, the fact that the Cardinals and the Royals are often on different days and opening day just makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. But I don't love it in college football either, despite the fact that I think for Missouri, I think it's a great move for them to move from Saturday to Thursday. I really understand that completely because of the Labor Day calendar. So I understand the practical element of it. But just as a fan, I really enjoyed it when essentially all the teams opened on the same Saturday. I'm the same way with NFL football too. Of course, I'll be watching the Kansas City Chiefs open up the season on a Thursday night as well against the Detroit Lions. But again, just give me that opening Sunday. To me, it just makes it all the more special when it's like a national holiday, essentially. All the fans, hey, we argue with each other online all the time, perhaps even, well, in real life at a San Francisco 49ers preseason game, if you saw that fight break out on the internet. But I'm just saying there is a nice common, I think, feeling of, hey, we're all excited for this one event together at the same time, that to me is lost a bit, not only with week 0, but just how spread out everything is in week 1 as well. But you know what? Speaking of those spread out games in week 1, really maybe the most interesting game of the week, at least to me, other than, I should say, the weekend. Well, not technically. All right, Thursday. Okay, it's number 2. There we go. The number 2 most interesting game of the weekend, Florida at Utah. Gators getting 7 points on the road, according to our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. And frankly, I think that's a little low, considering the Gators traveling to Utah. Just haven't gotten a lot of great vibes about Billy Napier and his program going into year 2 here. His recruiting has been really good by all accounts, just rankings-wise at the quarterback position and everything. But it doesn't appear that Napier has his quarterback this season. Wisconsin transfer Graham Mertz trying to replace Anthony Richardson, who was a top 5 pick this past draft by the Indianapolis Colts. I just want to see how Florida looks. Utah is a really, really solid program. Going to be tough for the Gators to go on the road and get a win. If they end up getting somewhat blown out, well, obviously that's probably a good sign the Tigers will be favored when the Gators come to Columbia later this year. Now, I'd say the best game of week 1, not a controversial opinion here whatsoever, but on Sunday night, Florida State taking on LSU. The Bayou Bengals favored by 2.5. I believe that's a neutral field because, right, if LSU was at home, surely they'd be favored by more than that. So correct me if I'm wrong there. But regardless, another Missouri opponent. Florida State, obviously a really good opponent for them. So a team that a lot of people, by the way, are picking to beat Alabama in the SEC West. So a good, interesting test early there for Jaden Daniels and the LSU Tigers. Speaking of Alabama, they're favored by 39.5 over Middle Tennessee, Missouri's week 2 opponent. So there is a little bit of a reason to at least check on that football game. North Carolina at South Carolina. Tar Heels slight favorites in that ball game. Obviously, another yearly Missouri opponent there, the last year of the SEC East. Perhaps not the last of the Mayor's Cup rivalry, though. We'll see when we go to pods there, inevitably, with the 9-game schedule. Kansas State opening up with Southeast Missouri State, then Troy, by the way, in week 2. Obviously, if that game's a little bit closer than maybe Kansas State would want it against Southeast Missouri State, I mentioned earlier that SEMO is the 11th ranked team in the nation in FCS, at least according to the coaches entering the preseason. So there's at least a chance that game could be competitive. If it is, that's a really good sign for the Tigers in week 3. And coming up, you know what? For as much time as we've talked about the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, the effect that's going to have on college sports in the future, well, I do think there's one issue that's actually even potentially bigger than that threatens the entire sport. I really believe that. That's not hyperbole. So let's talk about that particular issue. But first, I want to tell you about GameTime. And back in the day, man, you got to say it's nice having apps like GameTime, because back in the day, you had to trust some truly sketchy people if you're going to try to make something happen in terms of tickets on the secondary market. I went all the way to St. Louis for a Chiefs-Rams game one time, and, well, we didn't have any tickets. We got completely boned over by our ticket broker. Well, that's not going to happen to you with GameTime, especially if you're looking for last-minute tickets with a best price guarantee. Well, you can stop stressing about tickets and start getting hyped and getting fun. Heck, I'll probably use GameTime for sure at the last minute, being the procrastinator I am, to get to the Missouri-Memphis game here in a few weeks. And hey, tonight, if you want to get into Busch Stadium, just $6 to get in. You want to get in the 100 level, though, $12, not too shabby, right? Well, last minute, GameTime, this is exactly what you need. So snag tickets without the stress with GameTime. Just download the app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Now, these days, when I hear discussions about gambling, it's obviously related to the games themselves. Hey, which side do you like? Do you like the total this week? Yada, yada, yada. And then, of course, as a Missouri resident, there's a lot of talk about legality. When is Missouri going to get legalized betting? Well, I actually think there's a much more interesting discussion that needs to happen. But I also understand why it's not happening, interestingly enough, in a broader sense, because it's about players and coaches gambling on sports, their own sport, most specifically. And this is really a thing that's been picking up steam here recently. There hasn't been a lot of betting scandals in college sports in really the last couple decades or so that I can think of. But here recently, boy, it's really started to pick up. And with the ease of now not only legalized gambling, of course, but hey, everybody's got a smartphone these days. It's the easiest thing in the world to go to FanDuel Sportsbook and log a bet these days, which from my perspective as just a fan, hey, I'm just a guy who will put 10, 20 bucks on a game and have some fun with it. No big deal. I don't see any moral issue there or anything like that. But I do think a lot of fans really miss the point when they sort of say that it's hypocritical for sports to say, for instance, the NFL suspended Calvin Ridley, a prominent wide receiver, for over a year for gambling on football, not even on his own team. but just gambling on football in general. And people will say, well, that's hypocritical. The NFL has sponsors like FanDuel Sportsbook. They put the lines out there these days. Gambling's become legal. Well, if the fans can do it, then why can't the players? If they're not betting on their own team or betting against their team, then what's the problem? Well, the problem is, truly in this case, the appearance of impropriety is really as bad as actual impropriety. Sometimes that cliche is overused, but I really believe that's the case here. And there's a very, very good reason that Calvin Ridley was suspended, and I have no sympathy for him whatsoever. The NFL makes it extremely clear that if you bet on this game, period, you're done, basically. They're lucky he's lucky to even be in the sport, to be honest, because that type of thing puts the entire sport in jeopardy. If we as fans can't count on these games actually being on the up and up, sure, we can handle the loss. We can handle heartbreak to the point where we'll come back next season. How many heartbreaking losses did Missouri have last season? And yet a lot of Missouri fans, including myself, are excited to get to be heard again, as Michael Scott once said on The Office. We're back once again. But if we thought that the fifth down play, just to pick a prominent example, what if we thought the referees were in on that? Now, that would really ruin the entire sport. It really would. If we thought that the players were dogging it, for instance. And again, I understand this is why I don't think maybe the NCAA, certainly the SEC, is maybe as prominent on this topic as maybe they otherwise would be. If I were the commissioner of the SEC, if I were in charge of NCAA football in some way or another, I would be making this an incredibly high priority. But I also wouldn't be talking about it that much either publicly. I'd be kind of going about it behind the scenes, just trying to root all this stuff out, number one. Number two, making it incredibly clear to any player, any coach, that if you get caught doing this, betting on your games, any games in your own sport, you're done. You're banned. You're Pete Rose. I think that should be part of the solution. But again, even talking about this too much, there's always fans who are saying there's conspiracies and this ref was paid off and all that stuff. For now, it's a small group of people who are saying that. For the most part, most fans don't really believe that. They do believe, I think, that the results are on the up and up. But the more you see, when you see a player for Iowa, a player for Iowa State, prominent guys, a starting defensive tackle, a running back who were caught betting, well, and you see the Alabama baseball coach, by the way, got fired for suspicious betting activities in the Alabama LSU game. Apparently he had a mediator, a third party who was placing bets for him. I mean, this is really dangerous territory here, folks, because again, if the fans don't believe that this stuff is on the up and up, you have the potential to kill the entire sport. And that's not an exaggeration. It really isn't. So if you don't think that Calvin Ridley got what he deserved, if you don't think that those players who got kicked out of their schools, off their teams, got what they deserved because of some hypocrisy, well, to me, then I guess we should just get rid of gambling altogether then, because if you're going to let people gamble on the actual sports that they participate in, that is the biggest conflict of interest of all time. There's a reason Pete Rose is banned from baseball, and guess what? I think he deserves it. And thanks, as always, for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day, everydayers. We'll be back with, of course, more football on the show. Maybe we'll hear something about Honor Boateng's basketball visit this past weekend. No word yet on how that went. Obviously, no commitment appears to be forthcoming. That's probably the most notable thing there. But regardless, I'll have everything, especially football related, but maybe some hoops too, coming at you tomorrow right here on Locked On Mizzou.